Hey, welcome back to Divinely Uninspired, episode 23. It has been a little while, and it's not any one person's fault. It's kind of a collective. I and my family had COVID, and then there were some people on vacation, and then Jeremy and his family had COVID. And so people have been angrily writing in the skies with they rent those planes that write messages in the sky, and like, where have you been? And it's not our fault. It's your fault, because you gave us COVID. All right, but as always, I am here with Jeremy.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I'm glad to be back.
And with Penny.
Hey, everyone. We've missed you.
And we'd like to introduce you, though he's only going to be with us for a few more weeks, Ryan Matthew Suggs. He is our intern this year from Johnson Bible College. Go ahead. Introduce yourself, Ryan.
Hey, guys.
That's all you get.
That sounded pretty flat.
Those sweet dulcet tones of Ryan Matthew Suggs. Is it Matthew Ryan Suggs or Ryan Matthew Suggs?
It's Matthew Ryan Suggs. Ryan's my middle name.
Why do you go by Ryan?
Family thing. Every guy goes by your middle name. So my brother, my dad, grandpa, everybody.
So why wouldn't you all just name
your first name?
Right.
Yeah. It's just what we do.
Okay.
He's from Greenville, North Carolina. They do things a little different down there.
It's not weird. No, in Tennessee, there's people who do it too.
It's weird.
Oh, you're used Tennessee is the status quo for how people should operate their lives.
Yes.
Right.
Ryan has been here with us for several weeks, and we only have him for about 3 more, and so we wanted to bring him onto the podcast and have some fun with him. And we're going to miss him when he's gone. So we're all hoping that like Johnson has to announce that they're shutting their doors forever and that he needs a job, and he can just come here and live in Jeremy's basement.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we hit anything else, we got a lot to talk about. Let's hear a theme song. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're listening to Divinely Uninspired, podcast by Journey Church Shepherdsville, hosted by Jeremy Willis and me, Rusty Wilson. You can find us online at journeyshepherdsville.com. For questions or comments, email podcast@journeyshepherdsville.com. Maybe we'll feature your question or comment on a future episode. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. So it is really, really hot right now outside, and it's like, I think we're beyond the place where anybody thinks that climate change isn't a real thing, right? Like everybody agrees that this is something, it's hotter now than it was a few years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know. Whatever.
I don't know about all that. I mean, I believe in climate change, but like I do think that they did say that if you look at it, the 10 hottest summers in Kentucky, other than the one in 1934, there's an odd outlier, have all been within the last decade. So the 10 hottest summers on record have all been since 2010. So there's got to be something there.
Yeah. I think it's just an excuse for them to have, what is it, Hot Girl Summer? Have you heard of that? I don't even know what that means.
I think that was from like 2 years ago. Man.
Oh, okay.
Is that what you do, Rusty? Hot girl summer?
Yeah, I put on hot pants and bare midriff and a side pony.
You're dating yourself here.
I know. I'm not stylish in any way, shape, or form. But climate change, Ryan, do you think climate change is a problem? You're from the South. More southern than us.
Yeah, more so than y'all, but not super south. I mean, it's hot, but it's always been hot.
It's always been hot.
Well, because you're only 19, so of course it's always been hot since you've been alive.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't snow a lot where I live either, so.
That's because you're from the South.
This is going to be a fantastic podcast.
I'm just saying, climate change isn't just heat, right? It's like just extremes, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah. It's like, we don't have extremes.
Can
It's
you
also
explain?
an El Nino, not an El Niñe, or however they say it.
Well, there's El Nino and La Nina.
La Nina. I messed up my Spanish right
That's
there.
okay.
Yeah.
We're not going to Guatemala for a few more weeks, so you have time to practice. So there's some interesting ways to battle climate change. You know, we talked about one way back that MIT is talking about sending little bubbles up into space that can reflect the sunlight back to the sun. New Zealand has a way they are trying to battle climate change, and it is considering a gas tax, specifically a burp and fart tax on all livestock in New Zealand. So we're going to talk about this for a second because I think this is fascinating. The government of New Zealand has proposed a novel way of fighting climate change, charging farmers for the burps, farts, and waste of farm animals. So apparently there are like 4 sheep to every person in New Zealand. And the issue is when they burp and fart, they release a whole lot of methane gas into the atmosphere, which methane is not good for the atmosphere. So I don't know. What do you think? Should we be taxing livestock farmers for the farts of their animals?
I don't know. It's a weird one. I'm gonna be honest with you. I do know they talk about in America like all the methane gas from the cows, but I'm not smart enough to really understand how all that works. But I don't know. A tax on that is interesting.
Does it give like a percentage of how it's going to help? Because I'm confused, like how this is going to make a greater impact on it.
Yeah. So I think the plan is to take the money from the taxed farts and burps and apply that to battling climate change. So they give that to the climate change army, who sets up in the stratosphere and blocks the radiation.
I mean, so here's what I'll say about this story. So I don't want to get into the whole climate change too much thing, but I do think this is one of those things where you look at this and you go, what is the government doing? Like not just our government, but governments around the world. Like this is just one of those like odd things of like, they're going to put this tax into effect. This money's going to go somewhere. Like, where's that money going? Like, who's controlling
the climate change
money?
army?
It's just a weird story. I will say that I do love New Zealand because there's no snakes in New Zealand, and so I don't know if you know that or not.
I did not.
Yeah, there's no snakes in New Zealand, and so. But then if you go like to Australia, it's like all snakes, and so it's like real weird. They're like right next to each other, and one everything wants to kill you, and the other one like nothing can kill you. So apparently, other than methane gas.
So you said you weren't sure how this works. So in terms of how they're causing the problem, here's what the article says. Methane is the second most prevalent greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide, and the majority of methane emissions comes from human activity, since methane causes much more warming than carbon in the first few decades after it's released. But then it dissipates in the atmosphere more quickly. Clamping down on methane emissions is essential to averting catastrophic climate change. So essentially, methane isn't as bad long term, but in the short term. And so if they can cut it down in the short term, it will help us fix things now. Okay, then it says this. Contrary to endless Republican jokes about how Democrats want to ban cow farts, burps are actually the more widespread issue for climate change. As WebMD, which cleverly labeled the New Zealand plan an animal gas tax, explains, cows and sheep have stomachs with separate compartments, one of which, known as the rumen chamber, is filled with microbes that break down the plants they eat. That process produces carbon dioxide and methane, which they burp out into the atmosphere. So
this is so dumb. I'm sorry.
Why don't we just give them Rolaids?
What is that?
You don't know what Rolaids are?
No.
It helps with gas.
What about Tums?
I know what Tums are. Yeah,
it's the same difference.
Do you know the Tums theme song?
There's a Tums theme song?
Yes. Tum, ta, tum, tum, tum.
So I think I just solved it. I think we just give all the cows Tums and just see what that works first.
Okay. And then they'll stop burping and farting?
Well, apparently the burps are the problem, not the farts.
That's true.
If the burps are the problem, you got to figure out what, could you change their, I don't know. This is just, it's a weird thing.
Could we reverse their intestines so that they fart burps and burp farts?
It does seem like a weird thing too, because it's also like there's so many others. If this legitimately is the problem, and I don't know, I'm not smart enough to know if this is legitimately the problem. But if it is, like, we could stop eating so much beef. That could be like a thing. You could figure out like how to change their diet maybe to where they're not burping as much, or I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's just a lot there.
So no more steaks.
This is ridiculous.
Vegan is what you're telling us.
Well, my doctor told me I need to eat less red meat anyway, so I'm okay with that.
That's bad for you.
What does he know?
Yeah, it's a girl.
I'm just saying, listen, we're taxing
It's 2022, Rusty. I go to a female doctor.
That's weird. I don't, okay.
I'm the only female in here. We're not doing that right now. Listen, we're taxing people not because they have cars or they're driving private jets. I mean, we're taxing people for having animals.
And it's an income for them. So it's like, you know what I'm saying?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like, it just seems like they would be really not happy about that.
But it is New Zealand. And I mean, like, there's like 4 million people in New Zealand. So this is like a blip on whole thing. So even if they taxed every cow burp or sheep burp, they're still not going to change things. So let me ask you this. If you were to tax burps and farts in your house, how much money would you make, Penny?
Depends.
Yeah, it depends.
If your husband
And my husband is not home right now.
yeah. If your husband is home between him and your kids, how much are you making?
I don't know.
$1 per. A dollar tax per fart or burp.
I don't know, what, like $20 a day? I don't know, is that too much? $10 a day? I'd have to think about it. I mean, you act like my husband and my kids are the only people that do that in the house. Like, did you say that because I'm female?
Are you going to tax yourself? I would not tax myself.
I wouldn't tell anybody that we did any of that. Be like, no, we're good.
What about you, Jeremy? How much money would you make?
My son burps and farts a lot. He thinks it's really funny.
Yeah. So, well, it is.
It is funny.
But he does it a lot. Yeah. So we get quite a bit of money.
What about the silent ones, you know?
Yeah.
Do you tax those?
No, he likes to make it loud. He thinks it's funny. The louder, the better.
Well, it is. It's a funny sound. I mean, and every culture you go to, it's a funny sound. I like to joke about, do you know why God put your butt cheeks sideways as opposed to on top of each other? Because when you went down a slide, he would go. It's such a stupid joke. I love it though.
We've already lost everybody.
That's okay.
We've been waiting 4 weeks for this, and now people are like, yeah.
Yeah, we can wait 6 more.
I was listening to a podcast today, and they were true. We should start doing this. You can skip the parts you don't like. Just hit that 30 seconds advanced, and so we'll talk about what we want to talk about. And if you don't like it, just hit the 30 seconds.
No, don't give people that option.
Yeah. Well, they're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, if they don't like it, they don't like it. So, and they're really going to hate this second story if this one brings them down, because this next story is a doozy. So, what's the weirdest thing a pet has ever brought you? You know how, like, I don't know if you have a cat or a dog that brings you gifts. We had a dog that liked to bring us baby bunnies.
Oh, cats.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, it was sad. There was one time that she brought me a baby bunny that was only halfway dead, and she was like, "Here, this is a gift." And my wife was very upset. She grew up having bunnies as pets, and she was like, "You've got to end this thing's suffering." And so
That's sad.
I had to take care of that. And that was not a good day for me. I was like weeping as I was finishing this bunny off because it was awful. I had to use a shovel, and it took several shovel swipes.
What?
And
you couldn't get it in one swipe?
No, it was resilient.
Go for the neck.
I did. It wasn't a stab. It was a whack.
Use a cinder block.
Why'd you whack it?
Well, because I was trying I didn't want to look like Dexter where I'm splattered with blood.
Some hand motions going on here
How
too,
much
everyone.
blood do you think it has?
I don't know. It's got probably a few ounces.
Why didn't you just give it back to the dog and let it finish it?
Because she didn't want to. It was a gift, and that's rude.
No.
So anyway, so this is out of England, and it's from Jeremy's favorite website, IFL Science, run by Russian state media.
There's legitimately, I'm not kidding. I haven't forgotten about this. I just pulled it up on my iPad.
And now your iPad is.
I've like, no kidding. Like, my screen is nothing but ads right now. Like, it's just a bunch of ads.
I don't have a single ad because I have an ad blocker.
Well, I have it too. The accept all cookies. Heck no. I'm not accepting any cookies from
all
this
right.
website.
So in Dudley, England, a woman called the police after spotting a human skull in her garden. It was the first of a steady supply of human remains, all brought to her garden by badgers. What do you think of that?
I mean, the first problem is she's got badgers.
What is
Well,
a badger? What's it look like?
It's like that, like a
Like a skunk.
a skunk almost, but
Huh.
more
They're
violent.
vicious.
Yeah.
And they don't care. You've seen that video, honey badger don't care.
Yeah, honey badgers are like the most, like, outside of like grizzly bears, like the most
Gross.
deadly animal. They'll
Yeah.
just kill things.
They are gnarly creatures, and you don't want to mess with a badger. So 80-year-old Ann Mathers first called her daughter in, quote, hysterics after discovering the skull, BBC News reports. Police initially treated the garden as a crime scene, cordoning off from the public. However, the explanation, grim though it is, was quickly found. Here, I'm going to do this in a British voice, a British woman's voice, since it's from a British woman. She's been having famous skulls, the bottom part of her chin, jawbones, you name it, coming into the garden. Mather's daughter, Lorraine, told the BBC, "What you see is people's families, people's loved ones. It's horrific." That's my best British impression.
Don't ever do that again.
Oh, we just went up by 200% in listening. So these badgers are digging up bodies from a nearby graveyard.
Okay, hold on a sec. I just read that in the article. Okay, go ahead.
No, please. This is why I brought this up.
Okay, I get that they're digging them up from a nearby graveyard. Okay, that's one thing. Like, do they not use caskets? Like, is this like one of those places it's like Penny talked about there, like a natural, this is why you don't have a natural death or a natural burial, because a badger will dig you up. Like those, where are the caskets? Like, they can't get through the casket, right?
I had that same question.
Like, you know what I'm saying? That's my first thought. Like, or like even now, like you put person in the casket, then they put cement over the casket. Like, how are these badgers getting in this?
It's
and who's overseeing this this graveyard that badgers are just digging bodies up, and nobody's like, oh, we should probably deal with this. Like,
so the British Constabulary said that they are going to start patrolling the graveyard to scare the badgers away. There's a petition right now to remove the badgers in a humane fashion. Nobody wants the badgers injured, but they are tired of having body parts delivered to their gardens.
What an odd story.
It's very, very weird. And
it's kind of funny, actually. I'm sorry, just a little bit, that it's a badger, like nothing else, but bringing you like a hand. Like, here's a hand.
Well, yeah. And it's they clearly have a reason. It's either a gift or they need it moved. So
right.
What does the badger need the graveyard space for?
Right.
Do they burrow?
I don't know. I think they do. I think they do burrow. But I don't know about them. But I'm pretty sure I've read that before.
But that is I do wonder, like, how are these bodies not secured? I don't understand.
Body doesn't have to be secure. It's probably really old.
It's gonna rot away eventually.
Yeah, but I mean, they've been burying people in the United States for like 10,000 plus years. With
what's the oldest grave you've ever seen?
Oh.
Like, think about that. How far back can you go back? Because they redo graves. I found this out the other day.
Yeah, they used to bury people on top of other people.
Yeah. How crazy is that?
There's a graveyard here in Shepherdsville right across the street that's like from the, I think, like 17 or 1800s. Yeah. Like, you can go right over there right now.
We can go see if there's any badgers bringing out skulls.
Yeah,
that would be cool.
We don't have badgers here, do we?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
If you're a listener and please email us at podcast@journeyshepardsville.com information about badgers, and do not send us a wiki PvP.
Yeah, I want to know more about badgers now, actually.
They are pretty cool little creatures.
Yeah.
They're they have to, we must have them because Wisconsin's mascot is the Badgers.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean they're here. I mean, I'm not saying in the United States. I just mean like locally.
Oh, here in Kentucky.
Yeah, to our region.
I don't know. They probably call them something weird. Like they call woodchucks whistle pigs.
Yeah.
And so, which I don't understand. But anyway, so how do you want to be buried so that you don't get dug up by a badger? Go, Ryan. You're the one closest to death at 19.
Oh, funny. I honestly, I want to be cremated, I think.
Yeah.
But this could change, But if I'm cremated, nobody can steal my body.
Okay. That's a good point.
They could.
Yeah.
How?
They could steal the urn.
Who says I'm going to be in an urn in the ground?
Where else are you going to put your
Maybe I want to be thrown out over the ocean.
Okay.
Just the whole urn. You're littering the ocean.
Yeah, now you're littering the ocean. There's enough in the ocean already.
Haven't you heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch?
I'm giving back to the ocean. That's what I'm doing.
Oh, okay. What about you, Penny? How do you want to be buried?
We've
already talked about this. I want a natural burial. Like, I don't want to be embalmed. We talked about that. By the way, in Kentucky, it's not a law. So I can do it, Jeremy. Thank you very much.
But they would have to like put you on ice for the funeral.
Just close the casket and
put
me on some
stink.
ice. Then bury me within 24 hours. I do not care.
Well,
just
that's not enough time for everybody to get together.
And then a badger can dig me up. I really don't care.
I want a Viking burial. I want to be at the lake and just be pushed out on a boat and them shoot arrows at me.
I'm like, no land. Like, just
and not tell anybody. Just do it.
That's hilarious. I want to be cremated, but I want my funeral to be a chili cook-off. And I want a little bit of me sprinkled in each of the chilies.
Oh, that's
and then everybody gets to take a little bit of me home with them.
Do you think some people actually do that? Like, maybe.
There's a story about it that a lady did.
Yeah, it's called fried green tomatoes.
Yeah.
Nobody ever talks about how morbid that movie is at the end.
Oh my goodness!
Like, I understand. Like, they were feeding the person to other people and pretending like it's one thing that they killed the guy and then but that they're feeding him to other people. Like, you created someone to be anyway. But that's just my take on that movie.
Would you be able to taste it though? Like, if somebody made you something like soup, cut somebody up, throw them in.
I've never ate a human being before though, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. this tastes like Jeremy.
Yeah.
You know, it's,
I've heard that we're not tasty, but
I've heard we're
I don't want to find
rubbery.
out.
yeah.
I
Like
prefer
it's like eating a rubber band because we're so sinewy and muscly.
Mhm.
We're not ideal for consumption.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've definitely lost people now.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
yeah, no, you're good.
Just how do we get into cannibalism?
I don't know. Because I said I wanted to be sprinkled in chili.
Oh yeah, that's
Which, if you're listening, Leah, make plans because I'm definitely dying before you. So Relevant Magazine just put out an article that Jeremy sent me, and it is fantastic.
it's really good.
All of us here were youth group kids, correct? Everyone,
Yep.
yeah. So youth group was I loved youth group, but looking back on it now, it was kind of a messed up place a lot of times. Some weird things happened. All in the name of trying to help people get closer to Jesus. The weirdest thing, so think about this for a second while I tell my story. What's the weirdest thing that your youth group experience led to? So we did a lock-in, and our youth minister, he showed us this video called Without Reservation. And it's about these it's clearly shot in like the early 80s. And this was late 90s at this point. And it's these 4 high school kids that are on their way to a party, and they get in a terrible car accident, and 3 out of the 4 are killed. And none of them knew Jesus. And so they end up in this line going like what looks like a hotel reservation.
Is there an elevator?
Yes. And then there's like a computer that it's like, they type in what's your name, and they type in their name, and they're like, to the left, please.
Yes.
And those people go to hell. And it ends with one of the kids is like, wait a second, I think I remember somebody telling me that if you didn't choose Jesus in life, that you would. And it was a very weird thing. And then a guy so the video ends and the room's all dark, and one of the volunteers is dressed up like the Grim Reaper, and he's like calling us out by name and like, do you have your reservation? It was very, very bizarre.
Yes, I've seen it actually. That's pretty bizarre too.
You can find it on YouTube, and it is fantastically terrible. So anyway, so what's the weirdest thing that you ever experienced, Jeremy?
Oh, we did a lot of weird things. So full disclosure, I was always involved in youth group because my friends were there, but I was never like a youth group kid. Does that make sense? Like I went because my friends were there. I went a lot of times because we played basketball afterwards. So like I never really got into youth group. But one of the weirdest things we ever did was one time we went to a CIY conference, and the speaker there was like, his whole message was about how secular music is sending you to hell. And a lot of people were really inspired by it. And so our youth minister, who I loved our youth minister, I just wasn't really into like a lot of the Jesus stuff. And so he convinced a bunch of us to take all of our secular CDs and break them. And then we were going to make this giant cross and then make like a mural of the cross, like using our broken CDs. And so I went up there, and like I'm like going through all, like they're putting all these CDs in garbage cans, and I'm like watching kids like put their CDs in the garbage can, and I'm like, man, I really want that CD. And so like I ended up being a part of it, but I ended up taking a lot of the CDs that I wanted. And then like I was instrumental in like doing it because it was like kind of cool to like make this mural out of these other kids' broken CDs. But nobody ever like questioned that I was not contributing any CDs to the thing. But it was just weird because like there was one of my buddies, I mean, he had a huge music collection, and he felt inspired to do this. And I want to say that he probably broke 100, 150 CDs. And in my mind, I'm like, the time $15 a CD, this is before they were burning CDs. I'm thinking like, dude, you just broke like $1,000 in music. And then the funny thing is like 6 months later, he was like, man, I really miss all that music. So he started buying it again. And it was just like, I just remember that story because it was just like, and I remember myself because I like took a bunch of CDs. I probably should repent of that. I think I have at this point of that. But,
I think the statute of limitations is right now. So what about you, Penny?
I'd have to really think about it. Our youth group was really large. We also had like a fun name. Did your youth group have a fun name too? Ours was like The Rock.
Oh man, I wish. So we used to do all these things together with other youth groups, and everybody hated our youth group because I was actually one of the leaders in my youth group. And if you guys know me, I'm kind of cynical. And so like our youth group, my wife still tells me stories about this, that like when we go to camp or like things together, people hated the Oklahoma kids because y'all were all like punks. So we were like, yeah, that's kind of what we were. So we would have loved to be with a youth group called The Rock, because that would.
You just made fun of. Do you remember Rock City?
Oh, yeah, Rock City, man. Yeah. Anyway,
so Rock City was this thing here in Louisville where all of the Christian churches collectively were like, hey, let's once a month on a Sunday night pick a church and have a worship event for students, and we're going to call it Rock City. And it was it depending on the church that it was at, it was either really good or really terrible. And
I loved Rock City because I got to meet all the girls from the other youth groups.
Yeah.
I got tired of dating the girls in my youth group.
Just making the rounds.
Yeah. You said, I mean, I'm being honest about youth group. That's what I went for.
I will say this one time we did on our way to, like, I don't know, probably the beach camp. They don't show videos, right? Like, we can't watch videos unless they're G-rated, even for high school kids. And so we had to watch Carmen and maybe some Stephen Curtis Chapman, some Michael W. Smith. So all these music videos for probably 10 hours straight. Like, I do remember that.
I would lock myself in the bathroom.
Satan Bite the Dust is still one of my favorite songs of all time because it's so bad that, like, I just love it so much because it's so bad.
These like parodies?
No.
No, these guys were for real. Like,
Yeah.
you go later, Google Satan Bite the Dust. Don't do it right now. And watch it. And
you're in for a treat.
yeah,
by Carmen.
by
Just
Carmen.
Carmen. One
R.I.P.
name.
Carmen.
Yeah.
He's
It's like
dead.
he was like the Christian Prince, I guess, because
I don't know. I think you just, I think you need to take that back because
Yeah.
Prince was awesome.
Prince was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Roy, about you, Ryan, you're not that far removed from youth group.
I mean, we were weird kids, but we didn't do anything weird, if that makes sense. Like, my group was small. There was like maybe 7 of us.
Did you have a youth minister?
Mm-hmm.
Was he a good dude or was he a nerd?
His nerd.
Okay. Yeah. Well, most of them are. So, not ours though, because it's Jeremy right now. So anyway, this relevant article that Jeremy sent me that I just love, it says it's by Tyler Huckabee, who he's like the lead editor at Relevant Magazine. And his Twitter feed is hilarious. He's always very, very witty. And he says this, get ready. The ex-youth group kid is about to be a major pop culture character. And as soon as I read the headline, I knew exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah.
For many, many years, there were approximately 3 different Christian stereotypes that made it into mainstream pop culture discourse. There was one we'll call Goodly Two Shoes, so named for Ned Flanders. This Christian dork usually had a small mind offset by a big heart. Next up is the Fun Police, the dirty dancing type Christian who has very little interest in faith, hope, and love, but lots of interest in making sure nobody's having a good time. Finally, we can't forget the pervy hypocrite. Think Frollo in Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. I don't know what character that is.
I don't know.
Whose screeching indignation at the sins of others is clearly just a mask for the sorry state of their own souls. And so these are the 3 that we all recognize. It's like, okay, yeah, we know who these are. But then he says we're going to have a brand new character, the ex-youth group kid or the youth group dropout. The ex-youth group kid is usually young, pretty. What is wrong with me? I'm having a stroke.
Let me read this for you.
Yeah, but maybe.
The ex-youth group kid is usually pretty cool, young, pretty cool, and a little jaded. Yeah, they don't necessarily go to church anymore, but they're carrying a lot of baggage for whatever time they did spend in church. It's pretty accurate.
Yeah, very much so.
You know what's weird too is like I think about like my youth group was pretty big. We were at a pretty big church. So I mean we go on trips and take 50, 60 kids, rent vans, do all this stuff. And I think about that, like most of those kids that I went to youth group are not in church anymore. Like most of them are not in church, or they might be going now because they're having kids, and that's what our pattern seems to be as human beings. But most of them are not. So like a lot of them, and I think a lot of kids when I was a youth minister, a lot of them are not in church anymore.
Yeah, and the people that have stuck through with church, it's because they found something there that they weren't able to find somewhere else. Like the people I think about that are still that never really walked away from it. It's not that they just loved church as much as it was that the church community offered them something that they couldn't find somewhere else. And that's not because they were weird necessarily, but most of them came from really broken families and stuff like that. So I don't know. I can see a lot of people that I know falling into this ex-youth group kid. And in some ways, I think like Journey represents the people who are ex-youth group kids or new Christians in general. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the majority of our people. I think, too, the big thing with youth group was, I'm going to get another thing, but like, I think for a lot of the kids that I know that don't go to church anymore, what happened was like, even though I said I really wasn't youth group, our youth group was fun. Like, we had a lot of fun, and our youth ministers were always cool guys. And so, like, they were like, even when I wasn't into like church, like, I loved my youth minister because he always made me feel like good and special and, you know, all these type of things. And I think, you know, you go out of the like youth group and then like you graduate and they're like, see ya. You can either become a volunteer or you go to big church. And it was what we all call big. I don't know why we all call church big church,
we
but
call it that too.
Every ex-youth group kid calls it big church.
There's even a church in Louisville called Big Church.
Yeah. But like you get thrown into like adult service and it's like you don't it's not familiar, it's weird, like, you know, you usually don't relate to the senior guy or whoever else like you would the youth. You know what I'm saying? Like it just, I think a lot of them, they're like, man, this is, I don't know. They just
Well, we didn't have separate church. Like we sat as a youth in big church.
Yeah.
Did you not do that?
We did, but we never paid attention. We just like passed.
I know it
notes
was like
and,
3 rows of
yeah.
nothing.
We used to do that too, and we'd sit in the front row like we were good kids. And I think at one point we were so disruptive to the senior minister. He was like, "Can you all sit in the back? Like, could you all stop sitting on the front rows?"
Oh, that's funny.
But yeah.
Yeah, and the article points out that we haven't seen a ton of this demographic represented yet, but we're going to, and because we're already seeing little glimpses of it. So there is an artist named Similar. She goes by Similar, and she is she's a Christian singer, but she is homosexual, and her record has topped the charts, the Christian charts on Spotify and iTunes and all that. And then you've got other people like Pete Holmes, which very funny comedian. He's got a great show on HBO called Crashing, and it's all about his process of dealing with what he was raised as in his faith and all that. And so we're starting to see little pieces of it here or there. They mention in Arrested Development when the character burns all of her CDs. So
yeah. Well, Pete Holmes was going to be a youth minister. Like that's what he went to school for.
Yeah.
And then he got into comedy. And like, I mean, I love Pete Holmes. He's a little vulgar, so just fair warning if you listen to his stuff. But like, yeah, I mean, he went like, yeah, and he talks about it in his comedy, like that he was going to be a youth minister and all this, and then had like this existential crisis and all that stuff. So yeah,
yeah, and it's just it's going to be really interesting to see how people respond to this in a social way. Are people going to be offended by it? I'm sure there will be some, or are people going to be like, oh man, I identify with that character?
Well, and I think it's the culture. Like, I mean, we talked about Righteous Gemstones before, and it was like when I watched that, it was funny, but it was also painful to watch it because I see so much of what was going on in that show, not necessarily the drama behind it, but like the church side of it when they were like doing their church roles or whatever. Like growing up, especially for me in what would be considered a mega church, like a large church, like I saw so much of that, not to the extent that they were obviously, you know, it's HBO, so they're dramatizing so much of it and embellishing it, but a lot of the attitude, but even some of the weird stuff, you know, like when they do the whole like power team thing with like his, whatever they were called, I can't remember what they're called in the show, but I remember being like, there's just so much weird stuff in Christian culture that like, I don't know, I think it jacks some kids up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I know we've talked about deconstruction before on here and how there's some people that just really see deconstruction as a terrible and negative thing that is unhealthy for the Christian person. And I look at some of the things that, you know, the church has done or that we've experienced and say, well, like, how can we not kind of pull these pieces apart and see what we think about them as we get older and we grow up a little bit. So, all right. Any other thoughts, Ryan? Are you going to be an ex-youth group kid, you think, or you think you're going to stick it out? Yeah. You going to get into comedy like Pete Holmes, or are you going to stay the course?
No, I think I'll be in church.
That's good.
You know, doing something at least. My faith became my own from a young age, so.
How young?
Here. Like
3?
Junior year of high school.
Oh, junior. Okay. Gotcha.
Say 3.
You know, I didn't know. I didn't know if he was like
I wasn't
a super
in the church at 3.
like super Christian baby.
I didn't come to church till I was like late middle school.
Oh, okay.
So,
Good for you, dude. That's awesome. I just sound like a youth minister just now.
Yeah, for you, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you, bud.
Hey, bro.
Hey, bro.
It's because I don't know your name. All right, so let's talk a little good news because we really got a lot of positive feedback about our only good news day, and we could all use a little good news. Polar bears are successfully adapting even without as much sea ice. So you remember, like back in the 80s and 90s, everybody was worried about the polar bear. They were all worried about the whales and the polar bears, and the polar bears were the poster child, or the poster animal for the climate change problem, and they're doing just fine. So
Good for them.
Yeah. So this article is from the Good News Network. Also, this is run by Chinese Russian Coalition State House Media. The furry face poster animal of the climate crisis is still surviving smartly, even in a habitat without as much sea ice, according to a new survey. Along the Greenland southeast coast, the usual 100 days of frozen seawater is being replaced by a floating landscape of ice coming out of the fronts of glaciers, providing the bears with enough solid ground to hunt on year-round. So they followed this one species of bear. There's 27 of them, and they compared the data to like 30 years worth of information. And while they're having less offspring, and they're not as hardy animals as they once were, they are still doing just fine, and they're growing in number. So
yeah. So, my favorite thing about polar bears is I think it's the dichotomy of the human experience. So there's two animals on planet Earth that will kill unprompted just to kill. And it's killer whales, which if you watch any of the documentaries on killer whales now, like they're like psychopaths. Like they like play with stuff and then kill it and then don't even eat it. Like they like to just kill just because they can. And polar bears. And polar bears, I mean, there's always they'll just kill animals just to kill animals. Like won't even eat them. Like they'll just do it to do it. And when you think about the animals they're killing seals and penguins, who we all love to go see at the zoo. And so it's just funny to me because I'm glad polar bears are doing well. But like they're like vicious animals, and they kill the animals that we watch animated movies about because we think they're so cute and cuddly.
They really are, though.
Yeah,
I think they're resentful.
I mean,
yeah, they're like. I think the reason we care about polar bears so much is because of Coca-Cola.
Yes.
Remember the Coca-Cola? I think like marketing has made us think that they're like warm and friendly, and they'll rip your head off.
They do kind of make me want to give them a hug.
Yeah, they'll rip your head off. They really will.
So polar bears, do you know how they share food? They go and they boop their noses with the other bear and like, hey, want to share some food with me?
That's
boop
cute.
Your nose.
As they're tearing that little baby seal apart, they're like,
give me some of that. Might boop your nose and see if it happens.
But the Louisville Zoo like spent millions of dollars on that bear area, and I swear every time I go, there's no bear out there.
Oh, I love them. When you do see them, though, it's worth it.
Yeah,
like if you get to see them, especially when the polar bears are like playing in the water, it's worth it.
It's depressing looking.
It is depressing, to be honest with you.
It really is. And then they stick that grizzly in the other one, and you're like, oh,
and that
poor grizzly.
truck bed, and he's just like, I hate my life. Yeah,
yeah.
Basically,
he's like a lot of ex-youth group kids. He's like, what am I doing? Okay, so that's our good news. Now let's get into some actual important stuff. We're going to hear what Jeremy thinks. So we are going to ask this question, and Jeremy is going to give us the definitive answer because he is the end-all be-all. And that question today is the Old Testament useful or necessary anymore? There's so much in it that seems wrong and out of touch. What does it offer us anymore? So let's find out.
What does Jeremy think?
I think before I answer it, Ryan should answer it because he's the intern, and he just started shaking his head like, "What is Jeremy going to say right now?" He apparently has not listened to the podcast. So
apparently not. So go ahead, Ryan. Tell us.
So you tell us because this is useful for Bible college. We're going to send this to Johnson, whatever your response is. So is the Old Testament useful or necessary anymore?
Do you want some music behind you as you do this?
Sure.
So,
to my answer, yes, it is.
Why?
Because it's the Bible, right? I mean, we believe the Bible is inspired by God, then everything should be used from it.
Everything?
I think. Look,
it's okay. This is a podcast.
You see what they're about to do here to me right now.
This is a safe space.
Nobody's shouldn't
listening.
Have conversations with Rusty and Jeremy alone.
Nobody's listening at all.
All right. So, I think it's important to read and it's important to know about. You get to learn how different groups of people in different times interacted with God and how they lived. And I think that's important to learn while it does seem very out of touch with today because, not many of us believe in like sacrificing babies or, slaughtering animals, and like nobody's going to bring an offering for Jeremy to.
Where do we
do
sacrifice
instead.
babies in the Old Testament?
No, like the. Hold on.
Leave him alone. Go ahead, dude.
No, I was saying like the cultures around the
Gotcha,
time of
yes.
like the Canaanites and
Like Molech and all
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Like just the people they were surrounded with.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
Do you have to go back to Johnson? Can you not just stay here? This is too much fun. You being here with us.
I don't think this is very much fun.
It's good. All right. So I think you actually answered it well. I think you did. Here would be the points. So when I read this, I really wrestle with this. So a couple of things. First of all, I think we talked about this in the What is the Bible class. We call it the Old Testament. It's not really an Old Testament. Like it's actually a whole separate set of writings. You should not, if you have any Jewish friends, call it the Old Testament because they'll be like, well, that's insulting. To them, it's just the law and the prophets or the Tanakh. So to them, it's still a sacred holy scripture. And I think it is for us too, but we kind of dismiss it. And when you say it's the Old Testament, you automatically, it almost sounds dismissive. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, it's the old thing. We got the new thing now. Who needs the old thing? So I do think it's still useful, and I still think it is necessary. I think the problem with the Old Testament is not actually the Old Testament. It's our understanding of what it is and what it's actually trying to do. Does that make sense? Like, I think it's not actually the writings that are the problem. It's our understanding of them and how we've handled them. And so part of that is the very first thing I tell people when we get in this discussion is you have to understand the Old Testament. It's old. It's ancient. It's a very ancient document. And so you have to expect it to behave that way at times. It's also out of the Middle East. All of us that are listening to this and all of us around this table are Western educated. It is very Eastern in its origin. It's very Eastern in its way of thinking. So not only is it old, but it comes out of the East, and we're all Western educated. We get into the New Testament and you see the influence of Greek thinking in some of the New Testament ideas, but the Old Testament is very much an Eastern thing. It's been translated many times over from many different languages, so that can often make it confusing at times. I think the biggest thing I always tell people is it's a bunch of different styles of writing. There's poetry, history, narrative, including fiction and nonfiction. There's allegory in there. There's a lot of things in there that make it, you have to, again, understand all that. You can't read the Old Testament all the same. And it's also a lot of those events are based on oral traditions, which means some of those things that we're reading are written hundreds, if not thousands of years actually after the events. And they've just been telling these stories, and eventually somebody came and wrote it down. I think the biggest thing we have with the Old Testament that we have to understand that we do not like, because again, we're Western educated. And for most people, when it comes to faith, and especially the Bible, it has to be black or white. The whole Old Testament, according to the Jewish faith, is up for interpretation. Like that is like a big part of it. Like, and Rusty's, I know, talked about it before, like when, Jesus comes onto the scene and he's just he's not really ever officially a rabbi. They call him rabbi, but he wasn't actually a rabbi. But like the rabbis, and then like there's different schools of thought, and they were comfortable with one religious person interpreting it different than somebody else. And that was like the whole idea of like, how do you interpret this? And so that really makes it confusing for a lot of us, because we don't want to know, well, what's your interpretation of the Old Testament stories? It's what does it mean? Like, tell me the facts about it. And that's honestly not how you can handle it sometimes. Like, and that's not how they handled it. Like, it is up for human interpretation at times. And the rabbis, that's how they treated it. So, you take this really old, so all of those are the reasons why I think we struggle with the Old Testament. Is because it's ancient. It comes out of the Middle East. It's been translated many times over, a lot of different styles of writings. It's based on a lot of oral traditions, and all of it's up for interpretation. So you put all of that together and you have a recipe of disaster of people misunderstanding it, and people struggling with it. And there are a lot of weird things in there. And there's a lot of things that, if it's literal and it's a black and white issue, there's a lot of things in there that I think cause a lot of problems with us when it comes to our understanding of God. And I think that's the other side of it for me, has been that, to me, when I look at the Bible as a whole, first of all, it's not one book. It's multiple books written by many authors over many years from different regions, different areas, and different understandings of God. But to me, as the whole, the story, because the Bible, I think, works within human history. What's really fascinating about the Old Testament, or the Tanakh and Law and the Prophets, into the New Testament and the writings of the epistles and all that, it's a progression of our understanding of God. So as humans ourselves progress, our understanding of God progresses. So when you get to the old stuff, and people can disagree with this, God seems like a very primitive God. And then you get further into the story, and we start to see as we change in our understanding of us, but also God changes, there starts to be a little bit of a shaping and shifting of our understanding of God. And so I think that's the kind of fascinating thing about the story. And so I do think it's still useful. I still think it is necessary. It helps us. And I do think that it helps us understand Jesus better. If nothing else, it helps us understand the world that he came from. But I do think it helps us understand Jesus a little bit better. So I do think it still has a lot to offer us too. I think it's just, again, you can't expect it to behave like the books that you read today, and you can't expect it to behave, especially like the New Testament sometimes.
So let me ask you this question, because you made a really good point. The idea that the Old Testament, the understanding was primitive, and as human civilization grew and things changed, it was reinterpreted for the times.
Mm-hmm.
Do we still need to be doing that with the New Testament in our modern world today?
I think so. I think that I think, again, so I think that as foreign as the Old Testament, okay, so let's put it this way: as foreign as the writings of even David are to us, and they are, it's a very different world. I mean, and David, I mean, there's so many things we could just get into that would just be like, what? As foreign as that world is to us, the same can be said of the world that Jesus and Paul walk into. It's very different than our world. Now, we see progression, and we see that especially Paul, they're starting to be more and more influenced by Greek thinking, which eventually becomes Western thinking, which is how we've all been educated and think about the world. So, but no, even still, I mean, I always say this, I mean, there could not be anything more different than a first century Jewish person and a American, Gentile, white, Caucasian, Black, Hispanic. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. Like, there just couldn't hardly be anything more different. And that world was very different. I mean, and so, yeah, I think that some of that stuff is still needs to be interpreted through the lens of what was going on and how that's different than where we are now. And I mean, we can get into that for a lot of different things, but I still think a lot of that still needs to be broken down. I think that we try to make the Bible fit in, our world, and it does, in the sense that it's God speaking messages and stories, and there's still a lot that we can pull out of it, even in our world. But at the same time, we have to realize the world that it comes from, and what's going on and all that stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's I'm actually reading Pete Enns' How the Bible Actually Works right now.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And it's fantastic. If you haven't read that, go check it out. And I was telling my wife that it's really that book is almost feels like I'm being given permission to question things about the Bible that I didn't think I had permission to question.
Well, and I mean, even Jesus, when Jesus tells stories, one of the things I've realized as I understand it, there are things that Jesus says that should have it would have shocked the people when they first heard it. And we just read it and don't think about it. But there are things that he said, even, we talk about, I don't get into politics and don't talk about it because it just makes everybody mad. Jesus says a really, really a lot of political things, and we don't interpret it that way because we don't understand what he's saying. But I do think that even in that type of stuff, that there's a lot of stuff in there that Jesus himself even says that's very controversial, very shocking, and we don't read it that way, and so we also don't understand it. Does it make sense? And then the flip side of that is, I mean, this whole Little Cups of Joy is kind of based on that series, is that we take these things way out of context of what actually is going on in the Bible, and we try to make it fit because we got to all wrap it up and make it look nice and neat. And the Bible is very messy. It's very hard to understand some of the stuff going on. I don't think the Bible itself is hard if you're willing to put in the work of trying to understand the world that it's coming out of to some degree, and kind of what's going on with some of these people. And so, no, but I do. I think, the Bible itself has given me permission to question some of the things. And that's the thing I always tell people. Number one, when it comes to studying the Bible, is you have to let the Bible be the Bible. You have to let it be. And people are like, well, no, we want it to be this. And I'm like, well, I think you're actually being more disrespectful to it than I am, because I'm allowing it to be what it was, and then taking a look at it and going, okay, what do we pull out of this even today? Whereas you're telling me it has to fit in all these little nice little neat things. And I'm like, well, that's not really the book we've been given.
Yeah. It has to fit into my 21st century
right
bubble of understanding how this ancient document should work.
Yeah. What do you guys think?
So I listen to a podcast probably weekly. And basically what they do is they break down the Old Testament. And one thing I've learned, and one thing they've taught me, is that the idea of when you're reading the Old Testament is that you're looking at the way that God revealed himself to those people at that time in the context of what it is. And you learn from those stories based upon that. So that really opened my eyes to understanding the Old Testament and understanding the stories and trying to figure out how a God who seems so, I mean, he was crazy. He just seemed crazy, right? And how that became our God that we know now, and it's not the same. So it's the Bible Project, by the way, if you haven't had a chance to listen to it. It breaks it down. I love it. But another book that I've read by Peter, is it Peter Enns? Is that what you were just talking about? He wrote one, Jeremy actually gave it to me, and it breaks down the understanding of how we should be teaching the Bible to our children. And I really like that because it breaks it down as saying we should start with the New Testament, right? We start with Jesus as opposed to going to all the old stories about Adam and Eve and Noah. And now that I think about it, I grew up with that. And I know the majority of you all did too. And it was really confusing. Like, how exactly did that all work out? How did those animals get on there? You know, how did two people make the entire people in the entire world? Like, and it just creates confusion. But if you do it this way, where you're talking about Jesus before you actually get to where your brain development understands the context and everything happening in the Old Testament. So if you're interested in that, you should get that book.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, is because I think that I always tell people, start with Jesus. And here's the thing, even the Jesus story is a little odd. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a little, but if you get to the place where you understand Jesus, you have a relationship with Jesus, then the stuff in the Old Testament is a little bit easier to grasp onto because it doesn't seem as far out there. Does that make sense?
Right.
And, but no, if you just like start with the Old Testament to kids and you're like, and here's the thing, like even the Old Testament, to be honest with you, the stories that we tell them, okay, we tell them about David and Goliath. Well, I can tell you 10 other stories about David that makes you want to be like, what? Like, do you know what I'm saying? I mean, we've already, we you know, the what was it, Moses and the foreskins a couple weeks ago when we're talking about like the story where she throws, I mean, you're just like, yeah, we all want to talk about Moses and the 10 Commandments. Okay, well, here's 10 other things about Moses that we're not teaching our kids that are in the Bible. And so I think that when you start with those things, and I think that's the other thing about faith is most of the things I think people struggle with when it comes to the Bible come out of the Old Testament. I do think that that's the majority of the things people struggle with, not only the stories themselves, but even the social things that come out of it, and the way we treat certain types of people. And well, I got a verse, from Leviticus. Well, I got a lot of verses from Leviticus that makes me want to teach you that you don't want to take Leviticus as literal. Do you know that it still applies today? Because there's a lot of stuff in Leviticus that all of us around this table right now would already be in trouble for, And so I think it's just that thing of starting with Jesus as a Christian, starting with that. And then I think it becomes more palatable to understand some of the Old Testament stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rand?
I have a lot of, so I really do enjoy the Old Testament. And it wasn't until like I got into college and started reading books that people started giving me, but from a young age, I started asking questions about it because it is weird. Like you said, like we're taught those stories in youth group, and you're just like, what is going on here, right? And so I went to Bible college because I thought I could get the answers, and it turns out no, you don't really get any answers. You just get more questions, and you learn a little bit. But
That might be the most like succinct way of talking about Bible college I've ever heard.
I thought I would learn a lot, but I really didn't.
No, you don't. But one of the things that kind of put the Old Testament in perspective for me is that when we talk about history, and I love history, I know Jeremy loves history, but when we talk about the Spartans and when we talk about these ancient cultures, like we call it ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but the Old Testament happens before them. So I think a lot of people lose that gap, like that they forget there's a gap between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it just puts it into perspective, like because especially in Western society, like ancient Rome and Greece is taught in history and world history, and it's harped on a lot. That's just because that's where we get most of our philosophy from, and our like government structure and stuff like that is what it's kind of based off of. And so when I figured out, like if you just put a relative time, now we don't have exact dates for everything, but if you can put like just overlay, I don't know if any y'all did this as a youth group, but one of my youth minister, he got a timeline of like what we're taught in world history and in education. And then he put a rough timeline of the Bible from like Old Testament, New Testament. It was just crazy to see how everything matched up. And it really like I was like, wow.
No, I did not have a youth group like that. Ours was very literal.
Mhm.
Everything was exactly as it is in the Bible.
The Bible says it, that settles it.
That's right.
Mine wasn't. So I think that's,
Good for you. That's good.
it was. He encouraged us to ask questions, which I think is good.
Yeah.
But Old Testament's weird.
It's pretty cool though.
Let's just leave it at that. Let's
Yeah,
just make
it's
that the
weird.
answer. Like, just edit out everything we
Everything
just
else.
talked about and just say we're right. Old Testament's weird.
It is.
It is weird.
You're not wrong
You're
at
not
all.
wrong at all.
It's a very, very weird book.
Books.
Books.
Rusty.
Yes, I'm
Books.
sorry, books.
Literal.
Books. And Revelations is the last book of
Let's not
the
even
Bible.
get into that.
So
Last
No.
chapter.
yeah, the last chapter of the book. All right. So before we wrap up today, we're just going to tell you a couple of things that you need to know, things happening at Journey. August 7th is Move Up Sunday. So if your kid is going from one grade to the next, you will be moving up into a new classroom, most likely. You'll be getting more information about that from Kira, our children's minister. And also on that Sunday is a parent meeting for our student ministry. So if your child is moving from 5th grade into 6th grade, you are invited to that meeting.
And
as
we'll
well.
have our new student minister there by then. And so we'll probably have him on the podcast. Maybe next time we record, you'll get to meet Kyle.
Yeah,
So,
that'd be fantastic. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yep.
Next thing we need you to know. So we are going to be kicking off our PAX in August again, but we are trying to grow that ministry. We need more PAC leaders so that we can make room for more people to develop relationships and grow in their faith. So if you were interested in becoming a PAC leader, please reach out to me, Rusty at JourneyShepherdsville.com, or grab me on Sunday morning and let me know, and we will do everything we can to help you get set up. You can download the app for anything and everything that is Journey. That will keep you in the know as to what's happening around this place. But other than that,
Can I make one more plug? Sorry. I didn't mean to
please,
cut
no,
you off.
please go.
So our next series, Mixtape, we're super excited about. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be digging some of the most famous songs that you guys have ever heard, and we're going to be breaking them down, and the band's going to be performing them.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be a lot of fun, so you don't want to miss out on the next series.
All right. And with that, you all have a great day. We will see you hopefully in 2 weeks, assuming nobody else gets COVID.